Hi YouTubers, this is another video from your friendly neighborhood reviewer, Evelyn. Today we're going to be reviewing episode 1 to 5 of the new Marvel series Moonknight. I binge watched all 5 episodes, so this week I'll get to see the season finale with everybody else. So this particular Marvel character hasn't been introduced whatsoever to the big screen, and so this is the first time that we see the first incarnation of Mark Spector as the Moon Knight. The series deals with a key component that's very different from any of the other Marvel movies or series about the mental health aspect. So Isaac, I haven't seen much of his movies, but a good actor. He plays as Mark Spector, Moon Knight, and also as another personality, Stephen Grant, Mr. Knight. Mark Spector is a Jewish-American mercenary with a mental illness known as dissociative identity disorder, DID. It's just, in essence, the disorder, from what I've read, is when you suffer a trauma so bad in your childhood, the child's mind doesn't know a way to cope, so the personality fractures, and those other splinter personalities are used to help them to cope with what's going on with their daily life. So essentially, Mark Spector becomes the avatar of the Egyptian god Kanosh. I have to admit, Kanosh is a very good, the voice actor, the personality of this god, it's funny at times, a little bit sinister, because the idea of Kanosh, that he uses people to help him seek vengeance against evildoers, so hence he has his Moon Knight. So in episode 1, we see the beginning of a mysterious man crushing up glass shards and putting it in his shoes. From that sense, and then walking with the glass shard in his shoes, and we get the sense it's a religious cult leader. Who else would do such an insane thing of walking around with shards of glass in their shoes? And then we get a cut scene when we get introduced to the character Stephen Grant, a mild-mannered English guy. Isaac putting on the British accent of this caliber is a little bit funny. People criticized it, but as you delve into the series, you realize why he used that kind of accent as maybe a caricature of what we may think an Englishman is. So Stephen Grant wakes up from his bed and he ends up, we can see he has trouble sleeping, and for people that are not familiar with the comic book series, we just assume that Stephen Grant has sleep issues. We see that he wakes up with a shackle on his ankle, sand around his bed, so just for him to see that he hasn't slept walk. And we see how he's living also in London, how he travels to his place of work, which I get the sense is an Egyptian museum, and while he's traveling to work, he's sleeping on the bus. So as the series progressed, as the episode progressed, we see that Stephen Grant is bullied a little bit. Nobody takes him seriously, even his own boss, bullies him severely. And as the episode progresses, we realize that Stephen Grant has lapses of memory, when a woman comes up to him saying that, "Are we still on for tomorrow?" Stephen's okay. And then he has to take a double turn and ask the woman, "Are you asking me out?" And the woman's what do you mean? Of course you asked me out. So of course Stephen obliges. From the first episode, we can see that Stephen is very timid, mild-mannered, and he's obsessed with Egypt. But he works as a gift shop employee. He's relegated to that job, and when he tries to branch out, nobody takes him seriously. So as he gets, as we get acclimated to Stephen, we see that when he goes back to bed, next thing we know, he wakes up in the middle, I assume Germany, Sweden, in a mountainside with his jaw dislocated, and he puts it back into place and he has no idea what's going on. And when he gets up, he hears a voice in the background, which is Kanosh, basically telling Stephen to get out of the body and let Mark take over. From the sense that we get, Mark is the host personality, while we have the splinter of Stephen. So Mark is the one that does the missions, he's the muscle, while as the episodes progress, we see that Mark relies on Stephen's knowledge about Egypt for certain things. So as Stephen's hearing this voice, he has no idea what's going on. He takes out from his pocket a scarab, gold little scarab, and when he turns around, he sees that there's a house right behind him, and then there's the security guards out there shooting at him, and he has no idea what's going on. So he takes off for a run, and he gets to the village. And while in the village, he sees a group of people crowding around, and once he gets there, puts his hood up, and then we get introduced to the cult leader, Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke. When I saw the initial trailers with Ethan Hawke there, I was like, I was surprised. I was like, wow, Ethan Hawke, he's really great in these horror movies. But then again, I'm not surprised. So he really does blend in as the cult leader, he wants to purify everybody, stop crime before it happens, and he has his followers. So as Steven's seeing the followers go up to this guy, the cult leader Arthur Harrow has this like pendulum cane, and we can see that everybody has a tattoo of the scales. As you may know, in Egyptian mythology, it is said when the person dies, the soul goes to the underworld, and he's need to get judged on the scale by using the heart measured against the feather. So we can see the theme here within the series about judgment. How do we judge from good and bad? So Steven sees Arthur judging this little old woman, and the scale balance is not in her favor, and she's like, I'm really good, I don't know what's going on, haven't done anything bad. And Arthur is like, well, maybe you're going to do something bad. And we see the older woman being shriveled up, all her energy consumed by the staff. Steven is he has no idea what's going on. I think Steven was about to walk off until one of Arthur Harrow's men tells him what's happened. So Arthur goes and tells everybody to bow down, and then he sees that Steven is the odd one out. So I'm going to jump forward here. I'm not going to explain every intricate part of the episodes because it will take forever. So the main part of episode 1 is Steven dealing with this memory loss that's going on. And by the end of episode 1, Arthur follows Steven to the Egyptian Museum, and Steven, he's talking to Mark through the reflection. Mark tells Steven that he'll save him, but just let him get control of the body. Because Arthur came to the Egyptian Museum, tries to convince Steven, but lets loose a big jackal, which is it was like a big werewolf dog thing. And Steven's there running away from this jackal, and when Steven relinquishes control of the body to Mark, the main host, and we get a great transformation of the Moonknight. And within episode 2, we have Steven wakes up back in his apartment. It's true, nothing has been touched, everything as the way it was. So Steven's chalking up to maybe his memory, his bad, but something that's so vivid. He's trying to reconcile with what's going on. So Steven's like talking from the reflection, saying, to Mark, which he doesn't know his name, like, who are you? But it doesn't come out. As he gets back to the museum, he sees that the evidence of Moonknight fighting against the jackal, because at the end of episode 1, Moonknight appears, a really great shot, punching up the jackal. He sees that the CCTV footage has been scrubbed, that doesn't show no jackal appearing, and that the museum blames Steven for the bathroom, the toilets being destroyed. So Steven has been fired essentially for his job, and he's so confused. So when he gets back to the apartment, he finds something loose within the walls, and he finds an old Motorola Razor, one of those old type ones, and a locker key. And he sees a load of missing calls from a girl called Layla. And when he phones, everybody's probably seen this clip, when Layla says, I've been trying to call you, what are you doing? Where are you? And he's like, who is this? And then Layla says, well, Mark, what's wrong with you? And then he starts the first inclinations about the main host, Mark Spector. So with episode 2, he's dealing with the ramifications of that, and then he meets Mark Spector's wife, Layla, and he's trying to tell Layla that he's not Mark, he's Steven. And on the plus side, he's managed to find within the locker that belongs to Mark's passport, weapons, a gun, everything. And he's starting to put 2 and 2 together. These 2 funny policemen, not really policemen, come to Steven's flat with Layla, Mark's wife, there. Something obviously was going wrong. I knew these 2 policemen were the henchmen from Arthur. So Layla escapes out through the window, as where the 2 policemen go and take Steven to a remote location, and Steven realizes that all these people are the henchmen of Arthur. And when the 2 police people leave out from the car, Stephen's talking to Mark through the reflection, telling him what the hell is going on. He's still trying to comprehend things, and Mark's trying to convince Stephen to like let him have control of the body. Unbeknownst to Stephen, there was a radio left within the car, and Arthur was hearing everything. And then Arthur, we find out, was the previous avatar for Kanosh, and something happened. We can clearly see that Arthur is off his rocker. He wants to do some Minority Report thing of if somebody hasn't done a bad thing but has the inclination, or maybe we might do something to like kill them, which is of course idiocy, because we all may have bad thoughts but we're not going to act on them if we have like a strong moral compass. So Arthur is telling Stephen basically in cliff notes what's happened to him in a very vague sense, letting Stephen know that what happened to him was for real. And Arthur is trying to convince Stephen that he's trying to create a safe haven, so he takes him to a suburb, like kind of like a patch town within London, I assume, showing that he's got rid of crime. This whole neighborhood is fine. Everybody is like striving to better themselves. But in the meantime, he's hearing Kanosh talking right in his ear, and Arthur is like repeating some of the classic phrases that Kanosh might say, trying to convince Stephen. But on the other hand, when Stephen and Arthur sit down and have, something to eat, and we find out that Stephen's a vegan, so Stephen comes to that realization that Arthur is off his head. He tells him the most obvious thing. So what happens if, let's say, an old woman has a thought of a crime and she's not going to do it? Are you going to kill her before she does something? And it goes to the essential core of Arthur's flawed plan, that what happens if a child has maybe some choices that he might do something bad in the future? Are you going to kill the child before the child grows up? So in that moment, Stephen relinquishes some sort of control to Mark, and there's that interplay of a fight scene where Stephen's trying to escape from there, and then Layla returns there to save Mark / Stephen. And then at the end of episode 2, we see that Stephen doesn't relinquish control, but Layla's telling Mark, put on the suit. And while Stephen crashes out through the window, he does put on the suit, and then we get introduced to Mr. Knight, which is just so funny. We can see that when with the other personalities that Mark has, the manifestation of the Moonknight powers is a reflection of that personality. Stephen's there trying to fight the jackal that after Harrow released yet again. He loves releasing these demon dogs. And we see that Stephen's personality gets a little bit improved. He feels a little bit more empowered. He's there beating up the jackal, trying to save Layla. But he realizes it's a little bit futile. So we get that other scene where he fully lets Mark have control over the body, and then the classic Moonknight suit reappears. And then we get by the end of episode 2 that he saved Layla, but he inadvertently let this golden scarab, he got the golden scarab lost, and Arthur gets the scarab at the end. And with the end of episode 2, we finally have Stephen and Mark talking through the reflection. Now Stephen is in Mark's subconscious, but Mark doesn't tell Stephen the full extent of what's going on. He just lets Stephen have his own beliefs. The only thing that Stephen does know that he has another personality, but he doesn't know which is the host and which is the altar in this case. So Mark is trying to really console Stephen, letting him know that, okay, he tells Stephen essentially the cliff notes of what's happened. Mark made a deal with Kanosh that he'll complete his missions as his Moonknight, and he tells Mark tells Stephen that once everything is finished, he'll disappear and let Stephen take control of his body. But of course we get Kanosh reappears, the full assembly of Kanosh. What a badass character, so menacing, so mystical. And he tells Mark that Arthur has the scarab, it's too late, and then Mark tells Kanosh, we'll find another way. Kanosh says, okay, we need to go. And then Mark's like, where? And then we have the blackout for the end of episode 2. So from episode 3, 4, and 5, we have Mark in Egypt trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and more interactions with Steven in the reflection scene. Obviously now Steven knows that Mark was, is a mercenary, and Steven is clearly disgusted with the violence that Mark exhibits, so he's trying to stop Mark from doing so much violence. When I saw these episodes with my family members, they were getting irritated by Steven, but I told them there's some part of Mark that doesn't like the violence. So of course he created an altar to reflect those thoughts and opinions. And as well in episode 3, we see Layla, Steven's wife, has returned to Egypt. Because of course Layla loves her husband, but Mark never told Layla about his mental illness. So Layla finally figures out what's wrong with Mark, and they do have like a heart-to-heart, somewhat of a conversation, and Mark tries to apologize to Layla in some instances, but Layla feels hurt that Mark didn't feel comfortable enough to trust her with what's wrong with him. And then we see a great partnership between Layla and Mark trying to find out what's going on. And as well in episode 3, we see that Mark finds himself with no options, very few available pathways to find the scarab. And then we find out as well the ultimate objective that Arthur Harrow has. He wants to resurrect this type of god to emit, like some sort of like god to wreak chaos in the world. So Mark tells Kanosh, do you have any ideas what to do next? And Kanosh says, I have a terrible idea. And then Kanosh goes and causes an eclipse within Egypt, so we see like a crescent being formed, and all the other gods were forced to hold a meeting, and the gods' corresponding avatars appear. So does Mark, and when Kanosh takes control of Mark's body, he says, Arthur Harrow needs to stand judgment. And this part could have easily been solved, but then again, it would have no story. When the gods summon Arthur Harrow basically says that Mark is lying, Kanosh is just manipulating Mark has a mental illness, that you shouldn't believe him. But then again, if all of these people have godlike powers, then they have the power to read Mark's mind, his memories, but I guess not. They relied on the word of, clearly, even for a great actor, but him inhabiting this cult leader, I just wanted to strangle him because he was just getting away with everything. And ultimately, the god side with Arthur Harrow, as Mark does admit that he is ill, but what Arthur is doing is true. So by episode 9, this is gonna be a really long video. So one of the avatars helps Mark and tells him that there's a way to probably find the ultimate evil god's tomb, where he or she is interred, like the directions of where to find the god. And she points him to this, underground dealer. And when both Mark and Layla get there, of course Arthur Harrow is there, for God's sake. There's another fight scene. They managed to get this type of, this manuscript, these constellations. It's a bit destroyed as Arthur ran and tried to burn up the sarcophagus, the tomb in which the constellation marks is. So by the end of episode 3, Mark uses, Layla tells Mark, let Steven help us. And when they do, they realize that there's constellations that mark where the tomb of the ultimate bad god is, but they realize that they need to know exactly where the constellations were like 3,000 years ago. So the end of episode 3 is a real cool scene where Kanosh goes and uses time travel and uses Steven and he tells Mark/Steven to go and copy what he does. And then we have a cool scene where time gets turned back and Layla's using the tablet to mark the coordinates of where the tomb is. So, but then again, Kanosh realizes that he does this, or the other gods are going to trap him in a stone statue, and that happens. And by the end of episode 3, Mark/Steven are left with no powers from Kanosh. But Kanosh tells Steven, tell Mark to release me. So Kanosh is relying on Mark to find him and release him again. So that's what happens by the end of episode 3. So with episode 4, now 4 to 5, 4 we have a great Indiana Jones episode where Layla and Stephen are working together doing things, and Mark isn't taking the backseat in this case. And we see Stephen come more alive, be more embodied, empowered. And we see that Layla seeing, Stephen, and you can see that she appreciates Stephen in a sense and kind of takes care of him. You can see that Layla really does love her husband. She may not know the entire picture of him, and he's not a bad guy. He's been put in bad positions due to his mental health. Mark was in the army, but since of his dissociative state, he was kicked out because, they classified him as AWOL. So he had no other choice to be a mercenary. So when they get to the tomb, there's really cool, interactions with the undead. And then Stephen ultimately ends up finding the sarcophagus, in which was meant to be with Alexander the Great, and inside the body was the statue of the ultimate bad guy. But however, Layla and Stephen get separated, and Layla has a cool fight scene with one of the zombie Egyptian guys, and she almost ends up falling into a cliff. But then we see after Harrow is already in Egypt, he has the coordinates, he's doing the digging, of course, as we saw before. And she basically tells Layla that Mark has some sort of knowledge about her father's death. We find out that Layla's father was an archaeologist and has some concept that the gods were still among us. And he puts that seed of doubt within Layla's head. And when she confronts Stephen, she tells Stephen, let Mark to come out. And when Mark comes out, he tells her, I was a part of a mercenary team, but one of the people within my group got greedy and started to execute everybody. And Mark says, I tried to stop him, but that's the reason that he made that deal with Kanosh, because he was on the verge of death. But we can see that Layla's, obviously upset, but they had everything in that moment. They could have had this conversation when they went out of the tomb, but unfortunately Arthur and his men were there. And with episode 4, by the end of episode 4, Mark/Stephen gets shot in the chest. And then of course Layla there, crying her eyes out. They could have had this conversation out of the tomb, but hey. Episode 5 is the therapy episode, in which I knew that Stephen Mark is dying. So Mark finds himself in a psychiatric ward, and all the people that he knew or knows was there as patients, including Layla, and the psychiatrist is Arthur Harrow. And then we see things being unbalanced, what is reality and what is fantasy. And we see that my suspicions were confirmed, in which Mark is there running to different rooms, then he sees different weird things, and then he sees sarcophagus, and then he sees another sarcophagus banging this little tin out. He opens it up and Stephen's in the sarcophagus. So episode 5, we see both personalities there present, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And as they're running about, then we get a great scene of the beautiful hippo god, Tauret, probably I think the goddess of the underworld, and she comes out in a little squeaky version, and she's like, hi. So cute. And then we find out that Stephen's on the verge of death, /Mark, and there's all his memories there. But he knows he needs to get back, and he says the only way, and the hippo god helps them because she realizes what Arthur is doing, because so many souls are coming down before their times, before their allocated death. So she tries to help them, but she says the only way to help them is to go through this certain passage, but they need to balance the scales. But since both personalities are out, the scales can't balance. So episode 5, the therapy episode, we see the core trauma of what happened to Mark and the reason that Stephen exists. So big spoiler warnings. If you haven't seen episode 5, press pause and then come back after. So Mark, when he was a child, he had a younger brother. We can see through fragmented memories that they were exploring. It looks like they both liked this type of TV show about explorers, and the main guy was a British guy. So they go in, and then tragedy happens that the cave starts to flood, and Mark's brother dies. Mark's parents, the dad was in denial, but the mother she just had a psychotic break and she ended up blaming Mark for everything. And then we get a flash forward as the mother became extremely abusive, and the only way that Mark could deal with what was going on is when his memory got fragmented and had Stephen Grant, because the explorer that they both liked seeing was a British guy called Stephen Grant. And they realized the reason why Stephen exists to protect Mark against the cruelties of his mother. And then we see the sad bit of, the abuse that he went for. And Stephen, tragically, the other person in the altar realizes that he's just an altar. He's not the host. He was there created to help Mark through his turmoil and trying to understand what's going on. And then Stephen actually, realizes that he needs to help Mark. And then we get the end scene where Mark ultimately kind of sacrifices himself for Stephen. The other way around. Stephen sacrifices himself for Mark. And then we see that Stephen's there on the sands where the huge boat of the afterlife of the hippo god. And he ends up being trapped in the sand. And at the end of episode 5, we see that Mark is then in the field of reeds. We can see probably heaven, and then we get the cut of episode 5. Well, YouTubers, this is the longest video I've ever done. There was so much to cover. If you made it to the end, thank you. Hopefully I've explained everything, tried to condense everything. This is such a great series. I don't know if it's going to be a season 2, but we take it for what it is. To all those new people that have subscribed, a big thank you. And to any new viewers, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. This would help the channel grow a lot. And leave any comments to anything else you would like me to review. And what did I think about Moonknight? I love the series, talking about real issues. But anyway, as I leave you, YouTubers, bye!